Revelations.Unveiled.Detroit.
The American Descendants of Slave History. Understanding Reconstruction Violence. Known and unknown horrors. The freedmen here have been kept in perfect terror of their lives by the desperate men of the county who are hostile and active in abusive, assailing, and murdering this inoffensive people all over the county for any and every pretext that human ingenuity can devise, and often without any plea whatever. A Freedmen Bureau's official in Sherman, Texas, October 1866. The historical record is filled with scattered but consistent and devastating descriptions of the terror and brutality that thwarted what should have been a time of hope promise. Despite the plentiful reports from observers describing the frequent and largely unchecked murders and assaults Black people suffered during the Reconstruction period of 1865 to 1876, there is no established causality or casualty count or reliable total number of victims killed. Quantitative documentation of the violence of this era remains imprecise and incomplete. In the aftermath of slavery, historian Leon F. Litwack acknowledges several reasons for the sparse record. For one, Southern newspapers often suppress reports of white violence targeting Black people, alleging that the stories unfairly cast the South in a bad light. In addition, the boldness and impunity with which these attacks were committed meant that many victims simply disappeared, leaving no obvious trace of their fate. The trauma of racial violence also left many Black victims and witnesses afraid to report attacks or provide testimony against the white mobs responsible. And finally, the indifference and even complicity of local legal systems left few authorities to whom attacks could be reported, even if people were brave enough to do so. Whether dealing with slaves or freedmen, Southern courts and jurors seldom wavered from the urgent need to solidify white supremacy, ensure proper discipline in Blacks, and punish severely those who violated the racial code. After their initial experience with the judicial system, many freedmen found little reason to place any confidence in it. The laws discriminated against them. The courts upheld a double standard of justice, and the police acted as the enforcers. Today, newspaper articles, summary records gathered and preserved by the federally organized Freedmen's Bureau, and testimony taken during congressional hearings account for most surviving narratives of white violence targeting Black people within the first years after the Civil War. Those records provide only a partial list of the total Black victims killed and assaulted in acts of racial violence during this period. But review of these records paints a haunting and devastating picture of a period of deadly attacks that yielded thousands of documented victims and terrorized Black communities across the South with near daily acts of lynching and assault. The Freedmen's Bureau's records are the most comprehensive and reliable official accounting of Reconstruction violence against Black people, but they are not without limitations. Records of murders and outrages digitized and transcribed online span only 1865 to 1868, while those covering later years remain in archives awaiting consolidation and processing. Through review of those 1865 through 1868 records, congressional testimony, and newspaper reports from the era, the Equal Justice Initiative has documented more than 2,000 Black victims killed during the Reconstruction era from 1865 to 1876. This is a staggering figure compared to the more than 4,400 victims documented for the 74-year era of racial terror lynching that spans 1877 to 1950. It is an even more horrific figure considering the thousands of additional victims who may be documented in other records and who are undocumented and forever lost to history. The incomplete data now available should not be used to derive trends or comparative rankings, but aggregating these known numbers can make the terror of this period more tangible by painting a picture of the widespread nature of the violence and the ways attacks were often concentrated in time and space. EGI current records document acts of racial violence during Reconstruction that were reported to the Freedmen's Bureau or documented in news coverage from the era. Most illustrate that violence was concentrated in the South and touched most counties in the region, but also stretched to the Midwest and North. White mobs attacked Black communities and killed 3 or more people in one act of racial violence on many occasional fronts. In some cases, the estimated death tolls reached 100 or more victims. These massacres all took place in the South and were frequently waged by mobs seeking to brutally suppress the Black vote or to instill fear or terror in the entire Black community by killing alleged suspects accused of unproven offenses. Even as we examine the information, we can glean from aggregate data. The limitations of this approach cannot be overstated. How many Black men and women were beaten, flogged, mutilated, and murdered in the first years of emancipation will never be known. Nor could any accurate body count or statistical breakdown reveal the barbarity and depravity that so frequently characterized the assaults made on freedmen in the purported name of restraining their savagery and depravity, the severed ears and entrails, the mutilated sex organs, the burnings at the stake, the forced drownings, the open display of skulls and limbs as trophies. To understand and acknowledge the human toll and devastating terror wrought by the attacks that targeted Black people during this hopeful and fearful era, we must go beyond incomplete numbers to learn about stories that have survived and to contemplate the many that have not. And until we are together again, I love you. I love you. I love you. To be continued.
Revelations.Unveiled.Detroit.